So risk is like the real-time scenario that's kind of a compilation of all the factors, including the inherent hazards of the materials you're working with, what conditions you're working with it under, right? So, has anyone heard the saying, the dose makes the poison? So, you guys are going to be working with materials that are considered toxic, right? You'll have tetramethylammonium hydroxide that's toxic, hydrofluoric acid that's toxic, right? But the dose making the poison, that's kind of the point of actually pretty much any chemical has the potential to be toxic. It just depends on the dose that is toxic, right? So you can actually die from ingesting too much water. There's in fact a famous story of someone who did a radio contest to win a Nintendo Wii when it first came out, and it was super hard to get. The contest was they had to drink as much water as they could over a short period of time without urinating, and whoever won got a Nintendo Wii. So they called it Hold Your Wii for a Wii. And the person who got second place, she didn't even actually win. She went home from this contest, and she actually felt so bad that she called back in, said, my heart is racing, I feel nauseous, my head is killing me. And no one heard from her after that, except that later her mom actually went over and found her dead in her apartment. So she actually died from water overdose. It's a condition called hyponatremia. Basically, your blood has electrolytes in it, and if you dilute that out too much, it can be toxic. So the important thing when you're asking yourself, is this process that I'm doing risky, you want to consider how you're using the chemical, what are your possible routes of exposure, how much are you working with, and kind of weigh that against how toxic that material is. What are the health and physical hazards of the material you're working with? What PPE are you wearing to help protect you from being exposed to that? And then what are the environmental conditions that you're working in, again, to help prevent exposure to that material. So all those factors come together to weigh into what your actual risk is. And we're all thinking about your safety, so when we tell you, wear this PPE, work in the fume hood, that sort of thing, that's kind of what we're trying to do, is minimize the risk of something bad happening to you guys. So there's kind of two main types of toxicity. There's acute toxins and chronic toxins. Acute toxins, that's just going to be a short-term single exposure with immediate or slightly delayed health effects. So like we were talking about HF and tetramethylammonium hydroxide, those are both acutely toxic materials because they can be dangerous with a single dose over a short time period. There's also chronic toxins where you have maybe long-term exposure over multiple time points with delayed health effects. So that's going to be things that they're carcinogenic, for example. So you work with this a lot, and then you get cancer a few years down the road, right? So for you guys, if you're dealing with small time periods and short exposures, generally the acutely toxic things are the things you're going to be most concerned about. There's also a difference between local and systemic injuries. So local injuries, that just involves the site of contact with the chemical. Usually this is caused by reactive chemicals. So for you guys in this class, corrosives are going to be the main thing that is a worry for causing local injuries, right? So it's just you spill the acid on your skin, it burns the skin that it touches, right? Systemic injuries, those are going to be where maybe the chemical gets on your skin, it absorbs through your skin and travels to other points in your body, and causes damage there. So HF is an example of that. It'll absorb through your skin and then cause damage elsewhere. Just for your guys' own knowledge, there's just some general symptoms of exposure to chemicals that you want to keep an eye out for. The first is just, are you sensing a chemical odor? That can be a indicator that you are being exposed to a chemical. However, it's important to know that some chemicals you can smell well before it gets dangerous, and others you might not smell until after it's already dangerous. So carbon monoxide, for example, is generally considered odorless because you don't start smelling it until far after it's become dangerous for you. So it's something to know, but it's not something that is a hard and fast rule. If you have any skin irritation, respiratory irritation or eye irritation, especially since you guys are working with corrosives. That's definitely something to keep an eye out for. Headaches and dizziness can be a sign of exposure. Respiratory problems like a cough or tightness in the chest, trouble breathing. Skin discoloration if you feel like you might have been exposed on the skin. And then of course just any pain or nausea. Honestly, this just kind of ends up sounding like a pharmaceutical ad where they list like really basically if anything feels off, right? So if you come in, you're feeling fine, and then you work in lab and you start not feeling okay, don't freak out, but just consider like, do I think that there's a chance I could have been exposed? Maybe did I spill something on me or that sort of thing. And then if you do feel like something's happened, just report any symptoms to your instructor, and they'll kind of decide where to go from there. So in addition to working with things that are potentially toxic, of course chemicals can also pose physical hazards. The two main classes of physical hazards you guys are going to be working with is flammable liquids and corrosives. And really the single best way to prevent anything from happening is just to work in a fume hood. So you guys are going to be doing all of your acid work in your acid fume hoods, and then you're going to be working with photoresist and that sort of thing, and they have their own fume hoods as well. So those are really there to make sure that you guys A, don't get exposed to anything toxic, and also B, that these physical hazards are kind of contained within a controlled environment. All right. So we want to avoid any sort of adverse reaction, like being caught on fire. So for flammable materials, the flash point is kind of the number you'll want to be aware of. The flash point is the temperature at which a liquid produces enough vapor to burn or explode. So it's going to be the vapor over liquid that really is the risk of catching on fire. Flammable things are defined as having a flash point of 100 Fahrenheit or less, and combustible are defined as having a flash point between 100 and 200 Fahrenheit. Again, if you just work in the fume hood to control vapors, that's much less of a worry because they get pulled away instead of being concentrated in a single area where they could ignite. All right. So corrosives, this is probably the main thing you guys want to be worried about in lab in addition to toxics. So if you're ever adding acid or base, or if you want to mix it with water, you always add acid or base to water, not the other way around. Don't look at them above eye level. You want to keep them below eye level to prevent eye injuries, face injuries. You want to make sure to observe all the proper PPE and I'll talk about that in a minute, for working with corrosives just to avoid any sort of exposure. If you're neutralizing acids and bases, you want to be careful because that's an exothermic reaction, meaning it generates a lot of heat. You guys are also going to be working with piranha acid. So I think generally they have you mixing it in is it a 4-to-1 mixture about?
Yep.
Of sulfuric acid to hydrogen peroxide. The sort of minimum amount of sulfuric acid you want to put is the 3-to-1. Do be careful to follow those instructions. You don't want to have more hydrogen peroxide than that because it can be potentially explosive if you go above that amount. So make sure you're really carefully following instructions for mixing that, especially mixing chemicals, especially things like the piranha, because it can be dangerous if you don't follow those instructions. So for you guys, you've got some pretty detailed PPE to wear. You just want to make sure that you're always following that. Not only is it for your protection, but since you guys are in a clean room environment, you want to make sure to have the right attire on to protect your product as well. So PPE is just literally defined as any equipment or clothing you wear to protect against health and safety hazards. So footwear, lab coats, glasses, goggles, gloves, that sort of thing. So for footwear, we talked a little bit about this already, but really you would ideally be wearing leather or at least a chemically resistant material. You kind of want to think of shoes that are going to not be super permeable to liquids, because if you do spill acid, just because of gravity, it's likely going to go down towards your feet. Obviously, you guys aren't going to go out and buy these super intense steel-toed boots, but just tennis shoes that aren't super porous or leather boots are always going to be kind of the preferred footwear. Definitely no open-toed shoes in lab. You want to, like I said, avoid kind of loosely woven porous materials. no flip-flops, no heels, right? You just want it to be practical, comfortable, and as impermeable to liquid as possible. So here's kind of the specific outline for the PPE that you'll want to be wearing. Before you go into the gowning area, you'll want to put on a hairnet, also a beard net if that's applicable if you have a beard. Put on the blue nitrile gloves, those are your kind of inner gloves, and then put on the blue booties. That's what you need to walk into the pre-gowning area. Once you're in the pre-gowning area, you want to add the clean room suit. You'll want to put on safety glasses or chemical splash goggles, whichever of the two you opt to do. Don't forget to put on the hood, and then just kind of as a note, you can tuck the clean room suit sleeves under the blue nitrile gloves, so that way you kind of have, you don't have a gap there, like if you breach your clean room suit's not going to expose your wrist like that. So then when you're about to start working with acid, so you've already got your clean room suit on, you had your blue gloves underneath, you had your safety glasses. You'll want to add a face shield if you're wearing safety glasses, all right? So that's kind of your combo that makes it the most safe to work with corrosives. On top of the blue nitrile gloves, you'll want to add the thick roll-proof gloves. They're just kind of like a thicker pair of gloves. They'll be good with corrosives. And then on top of the roll-proof gloves, you'll want to add your outer white nitrile gloves. So you're going to have a total of 3 pairs of gloves on to work with corrosives, all right? Now, if you do happen to get just a small amount of one of the acids you're working with on your outermost pair of gloves, what you can do is just take out the outermost pair of gloves, toss them in the trash can that's nearby, and put on a new pair of those outermost white nitrile gloves. All right, so you want to do this pretty much as soon as you notice you have anything on your hands, because you don't want to risk forgetting about it and touching something else or spreading any contamination. Another note with the gloves is that generally it's a good call to just always consider them contaminated, because you might have touched something, you don't realize it. Maybe you grabbed a bottle that was contaminated on the outside, right? So think smart when you're wearing the gloves. Don't touch bare skin with your gloves, just in case they are contaminated. Don't get at your phone with your gloves, because you could contaminate your phone. All right, so just be really conscious of what's on your gloves and just always consider them contaminated. Then in addition to the gloves, you'll want this acid-resistant apron, so that if you do splash or spill, that will be body protection for you. All right. Are there any questions on the acid PPE? This is kind of maybe the most involved PPE scenario.
Let me just add, in the lab, Eric will go over everything in detail and show you exactly what it means in practice.
As an alternative to the safety glasses face shield combo, you can also just wear chemical splash goggles. So kind of whatever your preference is with that one. When you're working with solvents and developer, you don't need the acid apron. So you will still need the eye protection, so either chemical splash goggles or safety glasses and the face shield combo. And then you'll want to have 2 pairs of gloves on. So you'll still have the blue nitrile gloves, and then you'll have a pair of white nitrile gloves on top of that. So you just don't need the extra thick roll-proof gloves like you did for acid wear. So to put on gloves, there's kind of a best way to do this. Really, when you're, let's see, I think I have some gloves in my pocket. I'll just show you. So when you're about to put on gloves, you want to make sure you inspect them to make sure that they're in good condition. They can sometimes have pinhole pokes, even just new out of the box. So to put them on, make sure that they're in good condition. What you can actually do is blow a little air into the glove and trap it. Then once you trap the air, you can kind of use that to take a look at the glove, see what kind of condition it's in. If air is leaking, then that means there's a hole in the glove. You don't want to use it. Once you inspect your gloves, put them on, like so. Like I said, you'll always want to consider gloves contaminated as soon as you put them on. It's just a good practice. once you want to remove your gloves, kind of the goal is to remove them without touching the outside surface of the glove with any ungloved or uncontaminated gloved hands, all right? So to remove the gloves, what you do is you pinch the palm of your one glove, pull it up and over, ball that original glove up in your hand, then you'll slip your finger under the cuff of the second glove, pull it up and over, and now kind of the outside of the glove is on the inside, and you don't contaminate either your hands or your second pair of gloves, like your roll-proof ones, because you want to avoid spreading contamination like that. All right. When you're done with lab, I definitely recommend that you wash your hands, just in case anything did happen to get on your hands. So it's just a good practice to do. So you guys are going to be working in fume hoods, as I mentioned, for basically all of your chemical manipulation. The function of the fume hood is really just to pull air away from you and up and out an exhaust duct, so it'll capture any toxic or corrosive fumes. The sash height is really important when you're working with a fume hood. So you'll see here, that's going to be